Hello there and welcome to India's World, where today we turn our focus to Germany. As expected, Angela Merkel managed to secure a fourth term as German Chancellor, but the result was a far cry from her triumph 4 years ago. Merkel's party lost 8.5 points, bringing its share to the vote down to 33%, its worst showing since 1949. And in a major shake-up, a record number of 7 parties secured seats in the Bundestag, including the extreme right-wing Alternative for Germany, or AfD. Merkel's victory was expected and unprecedented, but there are many challenges looming ahead. To discuss that, we have in studio former Ambassador to Germany, Meera Shankar, with us. We have Professor Gulshan Sachdeva from the School of International Studies at JNU, and Jayanth Jacob, Senior Assistant Editor at HT Hindustan Times. Thank you so much for joining me here on the show. Ambassador, ma'am, if I could start with you. We'll talk about the challenges, of course, but firstly, just give us an idea of what this victory means for Merkel, and also as her, being the German Chancellor and her standing in the European Union.
Well, it's a reaffirmation of faith in Chancellor Merkel's leadership. She has been a non-flashy, consensual leader, and that's a style which, with which the Germans have a comfort level. She has also become the tallest leader in Europe, as other leaders have stepped down, in the UK or elsewhere after defeat, and has helped to steer Europe through a very difficult period following the global and financial crisis of 2008, the downturn, the debt crisis, particularly in the Mediterranean or southern economies, and the refugee crisis, which also threatened to engulf Europe with, and put strains on European integration. Now she has the challenge of dealing with a more fractured legislature and the emergence of a right nationalist party in response to the refugee crisis.
All right. Professor Sachdeva, after Brexit, Trump, and we also saw, this rise of nationalism that we saw across Europe, Germans, do you think, were being a bit careful? Yes, these, results were, of course, not in the favor of Merkel to a certain extent, but at the same time, it wasn't a dramatic result. And in fact, Europe can take some comfort.
Well, yes, you're right. It was expected that Chancellor Merkel will win again. She has won. It was also expected that right-wing political party AfD will be able to enter Parliament. They have entered. But obviously, she has got what actually she would have expected. And this political party, right-wing political party, has got slightly more than what it was expected in the opinion polls. Now, that always happens, say, for example, in any political elections,
yes, or
any election anywhere, because you can't really predict 100%. Now, what is really happening is, you see, right-wing populism throughout Europe is a factor, which we can't deny. And there are various factors which Ambassador Shankar has also mentioned, because particularly for the last few years have been very difficult for Europe, with all the Eurozone crisis, with Greek crisis, with the war in Ukraine, and many other issues, and Brexit and Trump victory. But if we see all elections taking place, countries, whether you look at France, you look at the Netherlands, you look at Austria, now yes, Germany, yes, right-wing political forces or populist leaders are a factor, which we can't deny. But at the same time, they haven't really threatened in a sense that you can really, the political consensus still is not really in favor of those political parties. At the same time, voters have also more or less rejected. And even in this kind of difficult situation, even in a country like Germany, where in fact refugees and associated issues were really exploited by AfD to the extent with all kind of rhetoric.
Yes.
Still, no political party, no other political party would like them to be, be part of any kind of coalition, whether in Germany or any other country in Europe. So yes, I think they'll be a factor, but still they are very far away from any ruling coalition in any of the Western European countries.
Yes.
But yes, if you look into, say, for example, Central and Eastern Europe, look at Hungary, look at Poland, still some of those populist leaders are in control. So I think next few years would be relatively difficult for the political scenario, but I think things are more or less settled.
Okay.
Because the way I think difficulties of Europe, there are of course still many difficulties, but I think the worst I can think is over. There is relative stability, and growth has come back to Europe again after 5-7 years. And refugee numbers are slowing down. So I think, maybe, they'll continue to be a factor, but I think they'll not really threaten stability in major countries in Europe.
All right. Jayanth, do you agree with that? Because it's interesting that he says that, perhaps the worst is over as far as that wave of nationalism is concerned. That hype that we saw for the far right during the campaigning period, the kind of media attention that it got as well, similar to what we saw in France with Marine Le Pen as well. And, it's now been quelled to a certain extent, and that is something positive to look forward to. But do you agree with that? Do you think that this far right voice is something, which perhaps will subside as time moves on, or it's something that is sure to rise further?
I think you have to look at it from both sides. If you look at what happened in France, this National Democratic Party, they won 1/3 of the seats, votes. In Germany, you can still argue in another way, 4/5 of the votes are still with 4 main political parties. But at the same time, if you look at where these votes came from for AfD, it's not so much from Eastern Germany, the old Eastern Germany, etc. So at the same time, since post-war era, around 100 seats of the main political parties have come down. So it's not an easy game for anyone. So at the same time, what happened, even it happened in many other countries, when the rise of a major right-wing parties happen, existing conservative parties or usual parties like Social Democrats or similar ideological parties, they tend to become more rightish. So I think that is a real danger. You can see it here also. And also look at which kind of coalition she is going to come up with. So that will decide the future of Merkel as a leader, the future of Merkel as the leader of the European Union, and a whole lot of other things.
Okay. The Free Democratic Party, it seems to be that is, of course, the clear choice at the moment, at least for Merkel. And by the looks of it, it seems like, that is going to be the look of it. And like he pointed out, of course, the Free Democratic Party is not new to this scenario of being called to create a government. But in a scenario like this, where Merkel herself doesn't have that much of a control in parliament, do you think it adds more pressure to that coalition?
Well, the Free Democrats are not going to be a problem. Merkel has, during one of her previous terms, not the last term, but the one before that, actually ruled in a coalition with the Free Democrats. So they have been partners, and it's a tested coalition. In fact, the FDP has traditionally made and unmade coalition governments in post-war Germany, because the other two parties would not get an outright majority, and the FDP as the third party would be the main factor in who got to create a coalition. The question is, that she may not be able to sustain a coalition only with the FDP, and may also need the Greens. Now, the Greens have a very different ideology. Economically, they are not that different in many ways, but on environmental issues, they have very different views, and on Europe, they have very different views. I mean, they are very pro-Europe, more open on migration and things like that. So they would have a very different outlook to, let's say, the right wing of Merkel's own party and her partner, the CSU. So actually, I think she's very skilled at coalition building, and may be able to get them on board. But running a coalition with 4 parties with very divergent political outlooks will also test her skills. The SPD, the main opposition party, which is today in the grand coalition government with Germany, has said that it will not join the government in a grand coalition any longer, and will sit in the opposition. So they will be the main opposition party. And their vote share was down by 5% to 20.5 or something like that. But over the last 20 years, the SPD's vote share has come down by 20%.
Okay.
So that is very significant if you're looking at a longer term trend. So I think it's going to be interesting. It's not going to be the usual, predictable kind of coalition building that has been there in the past, which has been much smoother. But Merkel is certainly skilled at building consensus. She is a consensual leader, not very egotistical. So she should be able to steer a coalition.
Mr. Sachdeva, post-elections then, do you think Germany's EU policies are going to change? Do you see that happening with the kind of coalition politics that we are seeing?
Well, I think what is going to happen now, you see, in the last 25 years, Europe had two major, very successful projects which they implemented. First was enlargement, second was single currency. And it was seen as a very successful regional grouping, and many other parts of the world were also wanted to kind of copy integration model of Europe. But now in the last 7-8 years, particularly after Lisbon Treaty, I think they were just busy with the, all kind of troubles what you had in Europe. But now with the British more or less out from the European Union, and Mr. Macron in very pro-European French president, and then Merkel again for the next 4 years, and economy relatively stable now compared to what it was in the last 7-8 years. If you look at now State of the Union address of European Commission President Mr. Juncker, or the long speech which French President gave just a few days back, and all the pro-European, Germany was always very, very pro-European. This was the main engine behind the European integration project. So what perhaps one can really see now in the next few years, Franco-German alliance, very pro-European, relatively stable. Still there will be many problems, and Brexit will still continue to be retained for the next 2-3 years.
Yes.
Within that, I think if you look at now, they are outlining new ideas of new projects. We didn't have any major European projects in the last few years. Now they are talking about, already they have banking union. They are already talking about some kind of common defense, some kind of some other institutional changes, like bringing both the president of the European Commission and the president of the Council into one. Some institutional changes within the European Union, and also economy minister either for the whole 27 countries after Britain, or perhaps at least for the Eurozone countries, more fiscal coordination, more common policy, asylum policy within the Union. So many more, and common Euro bonds, and so many other projects which were kind of talked about.
Yes.
I think now many of those projects will come back again, and there is a possibility that we might see some of more integration happening. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, because still there is, there are, in all these countries you can see there is strong political forces which are anti-Euro, which are anti-European project.
Yes.
They'll continue to create problems. But still, I think with two major countries having very pro-European leaders and UK out of the EU, I think one can see some of European projects seeing the light of the day in the next few years.
All right, all right. Jayanth, that's of course the EU picture, how it looks like, and now with Germany, the elections are done, and perhaps now things will again be pushed forward. But just talking about Germany in itself, yes, Professor Sachdeva said that the refugee crisis is something that perhaps now will slowly get sorted out. But do you agree with that? Do you think that is still going to be one of the bigger challenges, at least domestically, for Merkel?
I think so. I'm a bit skeptical about it. For example, if you look at the percentage of votes, AfD is just about 13%. But you look at what happened in UK. So UK Independent Party, if you look at the figures in 2012 or 13, their vote percentage or vote share was only 12 to 13%. But that was reason enough for a conservative center-rightist party to go for Brexit, and 50 people of British people population voted in favor of Brexit.
Yes.
So I think Europe is still in a state of flux, and these are signs of that. Which way it will go, we have to wait and see. But I think it's not a settled issue. The rise of this kind of parties is the sign of a larger malaise in Europe, and also the context to it could be the Brexit and the election of Donald Trump, etc. So I think these signs are still there, and it will take time before we know which way Europeanism will get to.
And the signs of this rising with a power like the AfD rising in Germany, it could spell dangerous for the rest of Europe because of Germany and its history as well. It's really tried to, show a unified front the past few decades. It's really come up as one of those voices of a free world, an open world. But, when you see such voices rising in Germany and with the kind of background that it has historically, it could prove quite challenging for Merkel, wouldn't it?
Well, I think it's more a concern for some other European countries. For instance, if you see the, commentary in the UK, it's more alarmist perhaps than it needs to be, given their historical memory of what had happened during the war. Yes, the mainstream parties still hold most of the votes in Germany, but if you take a look at the combined vote percentage of Die Linke, which is the leftist party left of the SPD, which was about 9%, and you see the AfD on the right, which is right of the CDU, CSU, which is 13%,
yes.
Then you're looking at a combined vote share on the margins of about 22%. Which is a substantive portion of the population. So the thing is that if the European economy, because a lot of these issues have flown from the economic stagnation in Europe and the debt crisis after 2008, because the recovery has been uneven, it has been slow. There is still the overhang of the debt crisis in many countries, but the economy is showing signs of revival. And the German economy has been doing relatively well. If this, economic turnaround takes hold and leads to a reduction in job losses and unemployment, then you will see that some of this ultra-right nationalism kind of peters out. If the economic situation, maybe turns around for a short while, but then again, the longer term outlook is relatively subdued or of slowdown, then you could have a different scenario, because a lot of these developments flow essentially from rising unemployment and from, slow economic conditions in Europe.
All right. Jayanth, the last polls before the results in fact showed that although 80% of the Germans are actually content with the economic reality, at least at the moment, and also their well-being, they are actually shockingly pessimistic about how the future is going to be. And that was, in fact, in the German media, at least, that was, hyped up to a certain extent, saying that, at the moment, things may look good. But then in the future, people are worried about the future. So, keeping all that in mind, do you think there needs to be an overhaul of how the economy is, how the employment situation is, and other development agendas as well of the Merkel government?
I agree. The economy, how it should be an important aspect. At the same time, they should also overhaul what kind of politics is there. For example, what happens in all these major political parties in different countries in Europe, there is a sort of illiberal decision making when it comes to democratic parties. Like, it looks to many people, many of their citizens, that Europeanism is an elitist project. We have nothing to gain from it. So it is going to take away our jobs, we are not going to gain anything, etc., etc. So the decision making has remained elitist in many democracies across the world. I think that has to change. Second, I think economic reasons are fine, but at the same time, the issues like immigration, identity crisis, or perceived or real, so these kind of issues can also trigger nationalism, ultra-nationalism. Like when Trump was coming to power, American economy was not in real doldrums, but there were this affection among sections of people, and that kind of a disaffection of the people, he could aggregate and make political capital out of it. So I think that holds true for Germany and other European countries as well.
All right. Professor Sachdeva, Merkel is seen as a leader who's strong. She's seen as someone stable, calm as well, but someone who's strong and can actually face up to world leaders, erratic world leaders like maybe a Putin, or maybe even a Trump as well, or for that matter, even Erdogan. Will she still, wield that much of power, at least within the European circle, despite these results?
Well, I mean, I think she is very strong leader. She has emerged because this is her fourth term. She has been one of the pillar strength of the European integration project so far. And she also had, as you mentioned, worked with other, major strong leaders like, from Mr. Erdogan as well as Mr. Putin. And she has been able to manage those relationships also. Now, whether the German leadership within the European project will continue as it has been in the last few years, because we also have President Macron from France. So he is also very charismatic.
Yes.
He is also very pro-European. So in that sense, I think this will be a combination of both France and Germany, which will kind of push European project further rather than just Germany, which is doing that, which has been traditionally anyway the case. So that will continue. So I don't think there's any problem for the Merkel leadership within Europe or with outside Europe. Now, all those issues, I mean, both panelists are perfectly, I totally agree with them. Now, there are two hypothetical situations.
Yes.
One is, if we continue to have all the economic difficulties, as we had in the past 7-8 years. At the same time, we also have large number of refugees coming to Europe. Then, of course, it's very difficult for any political leader, and this is a fertile ground for all these, right-wing and left-wing political parties to come to, political scene. But if there is a situation, there is a change in situation, and visibly one can see there is a change in situation. In the last 2-3, there was a time when, it was seen that, Greece is definitely going to be out of the Eurozone.
Yes.
With the intervention of the European Central Bank, somehow things have stabilized. I'm not saying the problems are over, but things are relatively stable. Since the growth is also back in Europe, not just only in Germany, because Germany was doing anyway reasonably well, but it has come back even to other countries in Europe as well. And the numbers, if you can see, all the refugees coming to Europe and particularly also to Germany. Now, Europe will continue to need people coming from outside, because otherwise the kind of demographic profile we have in Europe, they do need people coming from outside. So for that, they have to have some kind of common, not just asylum policy, but some kind of proper immigration policy for Europe, which will be useful for Europe as well as for other countries as well.
All right.
So I think if they are able to work it out, this kind of policy, when the numbers actually are down of refugee numbers, because if you look at from the 90s, 80s, even before that, there was always people who were coming to Europe. Only in the last 1 or 2 years, this year in the first 6 months, you have just about 100,000 people coming to Germany compared to what we had, more than 1 million in 2015 or 16.
Yes.
So it means the numbers have come down. There'll be much more rational debate because they do need people from outside. So if the numbers are less, they are able to work out certain, common policies within Europe and economies back, then there is a less danger of, then of course there'll be much more interesting politics, what I would say, within Germany. There is slightly more fragmentation of politics in Germany, what we have now. But that is okay. I think they can manage because they're still mature political groupings.
Yeah, that's right.
They may continue to have that. That's how the politics is.
That's right.
And all these other political parties, she has worked with all of them. I think the major issues are, European project, environmental issues, and the refugee issues. There would be certain differences on the approaches, but more or less, all the coalition parties, even if you have a grand coalition again, or she works with, say, with the Greens or with the
Federal Democrats.
So, I think they'll be able to work it out.
All right.
So yes, if the things are bad, then of course we'll have difficulties, but I don't see that's happening.
All right. And finally, Ambassador Shankar, for India, Angela Merkel, Germany, they've been reliable partners. There's been a rise, of course, in the kind of relations that we've had, and Merkel helm of things for the past many years, of course. So it's a comfortable decision for India, isn't it, that she remains at the helm of things?
Yes, I think it means that the relationship is stable. There will be no surprises, and it will be on course.
Okay.
But because to some extent Germany's energies have been sucked inwards within Europe because of all the crises that they have been dealing with, hopefully now, as they are able to perhaps look with a greater degree of comfort now with Macron's victory in France,
yes,
that the tide has been turned, if you will, then perhaps they will be able to look outward a little more, with a little more focus.
Okay.
And for India too, we need to focus a little more because there are synergies, on manufacturing, on skill development, vocational training. There are whole areas where Germany has a huge advantage, and we really haven't been able to build the kind of synergies which would bring mutual benefit to the full potential. So I hope we can do that.
All right, Professor Sachdeva, do you agree with that? India-Germany relations? I'm very short on time, but I would like to get your word.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, stability in Europe, because Europe is still one of the major, market for us, still major trading partner. But stability within Europe, stability in Germany, obviously is in our benefit, for our benefit. And now, in fact, next week anyway, we are going to have India-EU summit. So maybe that's how. I mean, if we are able to move on some of the issues, particularly on India-EU FTA, if we are able to restart negotiations, I think that will be helpful for both. And Germany has been quite keen on this, India-EU FTA, and one of the major trading partner of India within EU. I think stability is very, very useful for us and very helpful.
Jayanth?
I agree with Madam Ambassador that it is good for India in the sense there is a continuity in policies, but both the countries have to do much more to get and make most out of this existing relationship.
All right. Thank you so much to the three of you for joining me here on India's World, where we're discussing, of course, Germany. By law, the new parliament, in fact, must convene for the first session 30 days after election. So by October 24th, really, that's the latest. We'll keep you updated on the situation there, and perhaps we'll have another discussion on further ahead of what the challenges would be for Germany and Europe. But for the moment, of course, that's it on India's World. Thank you for joining us.